Welcome, Vault Dwellers, to the wonderful hellscapes of tomorrow, because today we are talking about Fallout, specifically the miniature adventures game Fallout Wasteland Warfare by Modiphius. But as this is a lore channel and I have a passion for this game, you better believe there's going to be some videos introducing players to the setting. And so that's the plan for this video, introduce Fallout to new folks who may not know too much about the franchise. There's a whole host of new people coming into it now that Amazon has released their show on Prime. And as people are learning more about the setting and the kind of history and the backstory and the vibe of it, I'm hoping to catch some of them into Fallout Wasteland Warfare. So let's chat about what makes the world of tomorrow a vision of horror. But one thing I like to add right up top here, if you like these videos and you're interested in Fallout or just Fallout Wasteland Warfare, please consider using my Modiphius link in my link tree down below, or the code that's right there on this thing. You'll see exactly how much money you save, and every single time you use that link, it goes directly to supporting me, my wife, our cats, the whole thing, and I could not be more thankful. Modiphius is very generous in supporting content creators like me, so it really does go a long way. Now, for those of you who are new to the Fallout universe, I'm going to do a bit of a sum up, okay? And if you're an avid fan of the lore, please forgive me for glossing over a few details. This is about introducing people to something that is quite big. Now, there are a few timeline discrepancies, but essentially the Fallout world is roughly like our own, right up until the time of World War II's ending. In fact, the aesthetic fits into that as well, with the world of tomorrow theme of the World's Fair from that era kind of being like the trajectory that all architecture and design went towards. A technological revolution that gets seemingly sci-fi tools and items into the common person's home. And someone once described it as having a nuclear age before a digital one. And that's partially true, but it's essentially giving you the sense of how everything is sort of this retro-futuristic 40s frozen in time feel. If we're playing a game of civilization and planning the order of our culture's advancements, it definitely looks like they leaned way hard into the promises of nuclear-powered tomorrow. It powered their cars, their tools, their homes, their factories, with expected results. And while this seems to be, on the surface, at least in terms of the marketing and the branding, a world of success and opulence, there are a ton of tragedies and epic tales that this setting creates. And each game really explores the various problems, again, that world manufactured. McCarthyism, if it continued and escalated. Robots were putting people out of work and riots were going down. The last oil fields dried up and the global economy began to collapse. And so, while this aesthetic of the Americana within the Fallout universe is this 1940s clean chic world of tomorrow, culture essentially stagnated there for well over a century. Now, based on game lore, there's a lot of debate about who actually struck first, but this is the day of the Great War. Tensions had been boiling over, specifically between America and China, and there's a bunch of super interesting background about how these nation states developed differently in this kind of alternate history after World War II. For example, the US annexes Canada at some point. But for the sake of brevity, let's just say that the US and China both go into full nuclear war. Bombs are fired out of underground silos, only to pass by enemy missiles headed right towards their home. And two nations traded death that day and plunged the Earth itself into a nuclear hellstorm. But luckily, some folks were prepared for this. They thought something like this might just happen. Of course, the government had plans for a nuclear war, ways of preserving the state and elected and military officials through all this. But also on the civilian end, entire industries boomed off the fear of the apocalypse. The big contender here is Vault-Tec. Think of it as like an insurance policy. Pay for a space in one of their Fallout shelter vaults. Ride the storm out and boom, open the door, you claim your paradise 20 years after everything has been erased and wiped away. There are some vaults that were built for other things besides the general public, like in Appalachia there's one to store the National Treasury's reserve of gold. But that's the basic idea. And these were built all across the country, truly a nationwide project, and each was advertised as a self-contained ecosystem and paradise. You have a vault overseer in charge. Whole families were slated to live in these vaults, raise kids, marry, learn skills, and so on. But what the general public didn't know was that Vault-Tec was far from honest about the vaults. Of the hundreds of vaults that were built, only a small handful were ever actually designed to function properly. These were known as control vaults. The term becomes very important in the discussion of tests. These control vaults were meant to preserve the best and the brightest, basically minds throughout the apocalypse, so humanity can begin again. The others were generally used as testing grounds that treated its residents as lab rats. The stated purpose behind this was that Vault-Tec couldn't save everyone, and the knowledge gained from these tests can help humanity once it rebuilds. Who would create the strongest society? What would make the best human? Never again would humanity be in a position to test and research itself in such an isolated way. And we're going to talk about the different experiments that these vaults did, but just as an introduction, they range from benign, like teaching people that the position of overseer makes you almost like an infallible Christ-like figure, which is more of a social experiment, to deep psychological tests on recovering drug users, mimetic things to drive musicians insane, population ratios, gun supplies being unleashed randomly, cloning machines, super plants, and so on. There's a lot going on. Because everyone wanted to try the different things to make humanity prosper. We don't have details on every single vault. Many of them that we find are in utter ruin, all the inhabitants dead or moved away. Many never really seemed like they were meant to open after the right time, but for those that were successful, and they did work and they did preserve life even if they were being tested on, and the doors did open, a new horror awaited them. The actual world of tomorrow. This was sold as an idyllic restart to planet Earth. Essentially, you go into the vault, you have 25 years of just living with each other, honing skills, the best and the brightest, you open the doors and you start recolonizing. This is essentially what you get to do in Fallout 76. The idea is that all the countries are gone, and in theory, nature has adapted and retaken all the land. And this was wrong for a lot of reasons. One, the conditions were so bad that Earth had a new meteorological phenomenon, and that is rad storms. Clouds of radioactive material that would batter whole coastlines with radiation. Some regions saw the flora thrive, like in the Appalachian Mountains. There's a lot of forest area. Others were so bleached with radioactivity that nothing but mold and maybe sickly grass can grow regularly. The wildlife as well took on some terrible changes from the mutations. You have stuff like yaoguai, which are essentially radioactive bears, and many insects grew in size, mosquitoes, scorpions, and so on. And so the world just wasn't what any of these vault dwellers expected to see when they opened the doors. The bigger issue was that there was more besides the flora and the fauna. Survivors. Despite the utter devastation that the thermonuclear war launched on all of us, humans found a way to live through the end of the world. And again, I bring it up a lot, but Fallout 76 really documents as well, because you find the people who immediately survived the nuking of the country. You get to follow the trail of how those initial survivors tried to rally back into some semblance of society, but a lot of them became scavengers and raiders, essentially gangs that move around in packs for safety. Many of these groups are openly cannibalistic and, obviously, quite hostile. There's also many people who found themselves partially immune to the radiation, becoming known what's commonly as ghouls. The feral ones lose their minds and they're kind of these agile, zombie-like creatures. Others keep their sanity and can now live hundreds of years, and they carry all the wisdom and knowledge of those eras. But on top of all of these things, there's also the horrors of an old world. By that I mean, you have the things that you're trying to survive against, the animals, all the monsters and stuff like that, but then there's just robots and military installations and defense networks that were set up to be autonomous that have not stopped working in 200 years. Or I guess whatever timeline, depending on which game you're playing. Some of them take place at way after the bombs drop, some are much closer. But like the point is, military machines and stuff, the mechanisms of war of the old world are still active. And because of that, you also get to see the dark secrets of the old world, things that it was working on that never went away despite their creators desperately hoping they would. For example, super mutants exist in Fallout because the government, through a few different means, was trying to create the next level of super soldier. And so it was created a thing called the Forced Evolutionary Virus, FEV, which again was not washed away when the bombs dropped, much to everyone's dismay. So it's this mix of the horrors that have been created, the remnants of the old world, and then the consequences of the old world that have taken this long to come to fruition. And like all my lore videos, I want to end this one talking about why is this cool? Why does Doug like Fallout specifically? I adore this setting. Morrowind was the game that opened role-playing games like up to me, but Fallout 3 is where I fell in love with world building and history, learning the different like files that you can find, the notes, and piecing things together based on how the designers laid a set out. It made me excited to learn about stuff that happened and to see the writer's thoughts on how, things could have shaped if the world were allowed to continue in this direction. It gives us a glimpse into some of the most inhumane societies ever. The callous cruelty of Vault-Tec in treating people like lab rats, the way FEV was able to trickle out into the world and twist everything around it, corporate greed that destroyed the lives of thousands of families with automation and war and everything like that. But that's generally juxtaposed against these incredibly human stories, tales of survival and bravery, finding resources for people you need, trying to reclaim part of the wasteland, make it safe. And it's whatever that looks like, right? The story of chasing for your father, or revenge for someone who's hurt you, or the child who was taken from you. Like, they're just very human stories in a very inhuman setting. And mixed in with that is all the campy 1940s sci-fi stuff that I adore, right? You got robots, you got brains in jars, mutants, thousands of clones all named Gary. Like, there's just all kinds of really fun things to explore. It's a fantastic setting for looking into the terrible questions that come about from a species as varied and fickle as humanity that have the power to wipe the planet out. There's great satire, humor, existential dread, and ranges from the absurd to the slightly too real. And I just absolutely have adored it ever since Fallout 3, which was my first introduction to the game series, although I have gone back and played 1 and 2 to great fun. To that end, friends, I'm going to be covering Fallout Wasteland Warfare here on the channel, and I just wanted to give an introduction to its lore. Let me know your favorite Fallout game and what your favorite part of it is. For me, like I said, it was Fallout 3, but specifically the Point Lookout DLC was my absolute favorite. We had just moved to Texas, and there was I don't know, it was just an immense amount of fun that summer because I didn't really have friends because we had just moved, so I just hung out in my house all summer and played a ton of Point Lookout. I had an absolute blast with it. The sights, the sounds, the different ways they played with the mechanics of the game and their DLC story. I want to know your favorite, so let me know in the comments down below and I'll chat with you then. Thank you so much for hanging out with me and listening. I'll catch you next time. Happy wargaming.